Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, July 29th, 2024. I'm John Podhortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, reminding you that on Sunday, November 17th, we will be hosting our 14th annual Commentary Roast here in New York City, and our target is no target at all. Not a good target. Bad. We've chosen a bad target because it's Natan Sharansky, the greatest living Jewish hero. So how do you make fun of the greatest living Jewish hero? Come on Sunday, November 17th to New York to attend our roast. Information on tickets and tables available at commentary.org/roast. And everyone on this podcast today will be there to meet you and greet you and argue with you and hug you and thank you for your patronage and stewardship. And by that, I mean executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, Commentary Inc. board member, author, co-author of Startup Nation and the Genius of Israel, and host of the Call Me Back podcast, Dan Senor. Hi, Dan. Welcome back.
Good morning. Good to be with you guys.
Okay, so
John, can I just make something clear before we begin?
You're not going to hug anyone?
I will not be hugging anyone.
He has a no hugging policy.
Yeah, I'm glad you know the words that there will be no hugging from me at the Commentary Roast. I just wanted to get that out of the way before we proceed to the news of the day. Thank you.
Because you know what? Those tickets would be selling like gangbusters.
I know.
When you gave the impression that not only do you get to meet
there will be
the
hellos, there will be maybe a handshake or two, but there will be no hugging.
I don't know. It sounds like you're protesting a little too much. I think you want some hugs. All right. Okay, so you know who's getting hugs is Kamala Harris. I was just thinking that the Democratic Party is like Calvin and Hobbes having eaten chocolate-covered sugar bombs, his favorite cereal, and bouncing off the ceiling for the next 5 hours, as Calvin is wont to do when he eats his chocolate-covered sugar bombs. I've never seen irrational exuberance like I've seen here. And I would think, by the way, Dan, you a veteran of campaigns, some of them which don't go particularly well, that
there's no it's correlation, not causation.
Yeah, fair enough. But that given what has happened over the last 9 days, $200 million raised, the entire party united, enthusiasm like we've never seen before, people talking saying things like, this is like Obama in '08, but better. All of that maybe she should be doing a little better in the polls than she has been, given this unprecedented amount of slavish, passionate support, attention. And I think we can agree, even though we are conservatives interested in media bias, that the lack of any critical coverage of any aspect of Kamala Harris's life and career heretofore, including the Soviet-style erasure of her record, even over the last 3 years, things being deleted from websites and that sort of thing, that, I don't know, I feel like she should have been up for a 5 to 10 point surge. I don't see that having happened. I don't know what it means. I think it means that the country is at parity, but am I being overly critical? Has this launch gone as well as it could possibly have?
Well, it definitely has gone well. I mean, you can't. Yeah. I mean, she's basically. I mean, if you're a campaign operative or strategist, you consolidated, the entire party behind her in like a matter of days. She has not been subjected to much scrutiny. There's all this quote unquote grassroots enthusiasm for her, and she's raised gobs of money. But I think the money point is overstated. Yes, money is important. Yes, money is an expression of enthusiasm. But Donald Trump has raised gobs of money too. In the days after Trump's conviction, how much did he raise? I mean, it's something on the scale.
$150 million,
yeah,
I think.
So it's something on the scale that she's raised since she, everyone consolidated, but since Biden anointed her and everyone consolidated behind her. So there'll be a lot of money in this race for both candidates. Neither candidate is going to need money. Money is not going to be a factor going forward in this race. Where I think we are right now is the race has basically reset to where it was right before the Biden debate debacle. That's where it was. And where it was for most of that time was a very tight race, a coin toss with with Trump slightly ahead. So that's kind of where it is now. So you would think, for all the hoopla and all the excitement and the way the press is talking about the rollout of Kamala Harris, it would be in a much different place than where it was, kind of hours before the Biden debate debacle. The problem was there was such a kind of downward spiral after the Biden debate debacle that the Democrats are now comparing where Kamala is now to that. And I think that's the wrong comparison. It's where this race was heading into the Biden debate, and it was still in a very problematic place for the Democrats structurally, because structurally things really hadn't changed for a long time. It was tight, too close for comfort for either side. But if you were on either side of that structure, you'd rather be the Trump campaign than the Biden campaign. That's where Harris is today.
Matt, this I think is a point that you were making, that Trump had a small but measurable lead before the debate debacle, and that lead had pretty much started, I don't know, in January, February, something like that, that if you look at the RCP chart, you can see this opening. It was a 1-point race for a year, and then it kind of, now remember, these are polls of polls. One of the virtues of polls, by the way, is they're supposed to eliminate the margin of error. Like, you can't say, well, it's a 1-point race according to 12 polls that are averaged, but there's a 3-point margin of error. That is not actually statistically an accurate.
That's hard. It's hard to do in American politics in 2024 when the country is so narrowly yet deeply divided. I agree with Dan about the structure of the race. All things considered, it's back to where it was prior to the debate. Trump has a narrow but durable lead. The lead is slightly bigger in the swing states, at least in some polls now. And the kind of issues, the inflation, immigration, chaos in the world, continue to favor Trump. But I have been struck over the past week with what the kids today call the vibe shift. There's definitely a vibe shift favoring Harris. And her one interesting factoid of the past few days is that her favorable ratings have increased. In the ABC poll that came out over the weekend, her favorable rating jumped like 8 points. Now, that's a consequence of this deluge of favorable press, of enthusiasm. You see the enthusiasm gap, which had been profound throughout this cycle, narrowing considerably. So even though the structure of the race still favors Trump, there are some things that I'm watching that make Harris, I think, more competitive than Biden ever was. And that leads to a second point, which is, as Harris has kind of been gaining steam, I mean, I don't know whether she's gaining steam or the media and the Democratic Party is kind of, blowing the wind into her sails to keep her moving. But as this has been happening over the past week, the Trump campaign, it seems to me, has been slightly shaken. One thing that was the case pre-debate was you felt from the Trump campaign, we're winning this, we have the momentum, we have the strategy, we know what's happening. And I haven't seen that same confidence so much. I mean, you see it, the rallies are big, Trump does his shtick, but they also have had to deal with, I think, not only a recalculation of messaging, which we can talk about more, but also now the blowback against the VP candidate, J.D. Vance. And so this has kind of unsettled the Trump campaign. And I think that's the slight second difference, in addition to the Kamala mania, that separates this race now from what the race was prior to the debate.
Christine, can I, not to bring you into the woman, the woman's part.
As a woman,
here.
Are you going to tokenize me on the podcast?
I'm tokenizing you as a woman, but Trump had a completely clear field to go at Biden in every possible way. Age, because he could go after age. He was around the same age as Biden, and look at him compared to Biden. Crime, because Biden's son is getting convicted while he's getting convicted, and there were all these unanswered questions about money and influence and all of that. Ideology, my administration versus his administration, all of that stuff. And Kamala is a slightly trickier proposition for him because even though, yes, he ran against Hillary and was, vicious toward Hillary, Hillary was the most famous woman in America for 2 decades and had a record, a history, a set of controversies surrounding her on her own. Kamala is less known. I would say that she is on surface more attractive. I don't mean physically attractive. I mean, as a kind of overall morph, she's more attractive than Hillary, whom a lot of people had come to find dislikable. And Trump, I don't think Trump and Vance can bring out the howitzers in the same way. They're going to have to find a way to bring out the howitzers without seeming monstrous or vicious or something like that. Again, to this very small number of people who are going to decide this election and who might go either way. Do you think I'm right about that, or is that like?
I don't know. They've already. I agree with Matt that they've had a few stumbles this week. I mean, the cat lady comment from Vance was just a complete unforced error, ridiculous. All he needed to do was go on Megyn Kelly and say, look, I was riffing. I said something, it's a little obnoxious, but I'm concerned about, and then he could pivot to actually talking about policies and culture war issues where he's not attacking women who don't have children for whatever reason. And he did not handle himself well on that. And I think a lot of independent female voters look at that and go, ew, just yuck. There was no reason for it. With Kamala, though, he has a several areas where he could go at her. She has to defend Biden's record because she was his number 2. She has to explain how much she was involved in understanding his cognitive and physical decline. She has to talk about what she did at the border. She has all these things. But instead of putting her on the defensive and answering those questions, because she's been in power for 4 years, he's doing this thing where he's kind of testing out new material like a comedian on a kind of mid-level circuit. He's like, she has low IQ. And people are like, I mean, maybe, who knows? None of it's sticking because, as you say, both she's unknown, but also he's not attacking her record. She's the most liberal senator in the Senate when she was in the Senate. She has terrible policy ideas. She is a left-wing San Francisco Democrat. All of these things are far to the left of most Americans. He should be focusing on that, or focusing on the disarray that continues in the Democratic Party. We're going to see, look, there's already fighting. Reid Hoffman, other big donors to the party are already putting pressure on Kamala. Get rid of Lena Khan, get rid of the tariffs. So you've got to shift the party back to the center on business and economic matters. So she's got her own coalitions to keep in mind. Or he could just simply keep pointing to the fact that she segregates all of her voters in Zoom calls that kind of devolve into
affinity groups.
It's the
Fieldston school approach to running a presidential election campaign.
He should say, look at what she's doing with her own loyal voters. That's what she wants to do to America. And that's bringing back the DEI.
Abe, so Trump on Saturday said she is the most left-wing person in the history of America. Now, again, he should be going at her as a left-winger. It strikes me when he does that, and there are more left-wing people who are more famous than she right at this moment, or kind of more internet famous than she in weird ways. It's like overdoing it. Like AOC is more left-wing than her. Elizabeth Warren is more left-wing than she is. Bernie, but it's also people who know. Okay, go ahead.
It's also too broad. I mean, it's just a broad pronouncement that doesn't sort of land on her, because you gotta beef it up and sort of cite chapter and verse. I think the Trump campaign could have more of an opportunity to really make something happen when there is some scrutiny of her. When she has to get out and say something off the cuff, when there is an interview, she could screw up in some spectacular way. That is very, very possible with her if she gets out in front. If there is anything resembling a candid moment, then there will be. She's very target rich. She's being completely protected.
Okay, yeah. So let's talk ideologically about her protection and things that are going on with her. And granted, okay, so she's only been in the race for a week, which is ridiculous because she's of course been in the race for 2 years as his running mate. But one of the reasons, Dan, we obviously are thrilled to have you on to talk about politics, but also to talk about Israel and this horrifying event. Actually kind of unprecedented. We need to lay out why it's unprecedented. This attack on this Druze town in the Golan Heights, Majd al-Shams, which is unprecedented because, generally speaking, Hezbollah firing from Lebanon has not targeted the Golan Heights. It has targeted the north of Israel. It has not targeted the Golan Heights, which are in the north of Israel and are, in fact, part of Israeli territory now. But they have tended to avoid it in part because the Druze village, or this Druze area that was hit, a lot of the people in it are not Israeli citizens, have not had citizenship. And nominally, as Mati Friedman says on your very fine podcast this morning, sort of bore allegiance to Syria in a general sense. Their area was only taken over after 1973. There have been Druze who are citizens of Israel since the War of Independence, who are fully integrated into Israeli society. So that this came as an utterly unexpected shock, the violence and the viciousness of this attack on 12 kids and dozens others injured, and all of that. And Harris hasn't said anything. Like, I'm sorry, like, she's now the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. There's a major event that might trigger a regional war in the Middle East, and she doesn't come out to a microphone and say something. I don't know. That's where the protection is going on. That
it's not sustainable. She's going to have to say something. First of all, what she said last week after she met with Netanyahu, among her criticisms of Israel, was how Palestinian children, she focused on Palestinian children, images of Palestinian children who are suffering in Gaza. Well, here, 12 Israeli children, Israeli Druze or Druze, depending, not all of them are residents of Israel for the reasons you're describing, John, but nonetheless, children playing on a soccer field, parents watching their children play on a soccer field, watching them get slaughtered, by the standard she set, by her own standard last week. Images of children suffering is reason to speak out. This is that, A, and B, at a strategic level, and a geopolitical level. Yes, this has the potential to trigger a kind of 1973 level, Yom Kippur War level regional war that has incredible stakes for the United States. And I just can't believe she's not. And remember, she said last week, in addition to her concern about the Palestinian children, she prefaced her criticism of Israel with Israel has a right to defend itself, right? And then the but, as you guys pointed out, Israel has a right to defend itself, but. Well, if ever there was a question about whether or not Israel has a right to defend itself, it was this weekend.
I think it's important to note that it's a highly controversial matter inside Israel that Israel has not fully responded to Hezbollah. 100,000 Israelis remain after 9 months in exile inside their own country, evacuated not only by the government but by themselves, because their homes are not secure and are within very easy reach of Hezbollah's not complicated rockets. It's easy rockets, the rockets that it can fire off at will, because it has really much better and much more powerful ones it has in reserve for a major war. And under these circumstances, a lot of Israelis thought that Israel should have started the two-front war in October of 2023, after October 7th, because Hamas is an Iranian proxy. Hezbollah is effectively a sub-Iranian army. I mean, Hamas is its own actor with a lot of Iranian support. Hezbollah is part of Iran's war fighting. I mean, capacity. I don't know how else you would put it. And so the idea was, if we don't do one, if we don't do both, we're not going to dig up the threat to us at the root. And now we have this situation in which the language that is being used about Israel, as though Israel had not been restraining itself in the north toward Hezbollah, which has been firing hundreds and hundreds of rockets a day now, in particular for 6 weeks. Israel has been restraining itself, and the restraint has had a cost. And part of the cost is what happened this weekend, And if the administration and its envoy Amos Hochstein, who is trying to negotiate with Lebanon and all of that, continue to use the language of restraint about Israel and its behavior toward Hezbollah, who's to say that what's happened here isn't almost designed as a test of Kamala Harris? I'm not joking. Like, the president is no longer running. He is non-compos mentis. There is no, there is this kind of entropic presidency and this new candidate, and she's being tested as we speak. And as far as I can tell, is frozen like a deer in the headlights.
Well, I think this speaks to Harris's big problem, which is, try as she might, she can't escape the Biden record and the Biden policy. Her national security advisor, Phil Gordon, did release some type of statement over the weekend. I read it online. It was a typical mealy-mouthed Biden administration pablum about the conflict in the Middle East. There were some references. It was a bizarre reference to reaching a peace agreement between Israel and Hezbollah so that residents on both sides of the border can return to their homes. I was actually unaware that Lebanese have evacuated their homes because of Hezbollah. I didn't know about that.
There is some of that. There have been a lot of evacuations in southern Lebanon, but that's not the point.
Exactly. Right. That's not the point. It's not the 100,000 Israelis, had to deal with the fires from the rockets and now 12 dead kids. So it was a very disappointing message from Gordon. And of course, it was completely in line with Harris's disappointing message after she met with Netanyahu last week. So this is who Harris is. If anything, she's going to be to the left of Biden when it comes to Israel. And that's disturbing. And that's an opportunity, I think, for the Trump campaign. Just as immigration continues to be an opportunity for the Trump campaign, just as inflation continues to be an opportunity for the Trump campaign. And when I speak of kind of, I don't know, off the Trump campaign being kind of unsettled by the past week, it's because I don't see that continual message being driven in. She owns this record. This is her administration. And instead, we kind of have attacks on, well, she's very far left. We know that. You can do that. Or they're going back to her time as the state attorney general in California or as the presidential candidate. You can do that. You can force her. But I think where this election will be decided is, do you want 4 more years or worse of what we've been experiencing?
The 2 a.m. phone call approach. Who do you want answering that?
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to, the reason Vice President Harris should be put under pressure to really address this issue, but it's not, it obviously is much bigger than her, is we've been hearing since October 7th from those who have believed that Israel has a right to defend itself, and the but is always about, is sort of undergirded by this sense that this didn't, to quote the UN Secretary General, this October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum, as he has said. Right? There's a long history here. There's a territorial dispute, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. Okay, I mean, I will debate that all day long, but if that is your view, then do these attacks on Israel's north happen in a vacuum? Like, what's the territorial dispute there? What is Hezbollah actually fighting against when it is slaughtering Israeli children? Why is it slaughtering Israeli children? There's no history there.
This is a very important point, because I think maybe it's worth a 2-minute history lesson. Israel had a position in southern Lebanon. After 1982, after the war waged in 1982, it effectively occupied or semi-occupied 18 miles of southern Lebanon. And in 1999, it pulled out. Ehud Barak, the prime minister of Israel, pulled Israeli troops.
Ran for office saying he was going to pull out. And the Israeli public supported him, and he did it. He pulled out. Unilaterally.
Under a UN resolution 1701, Hezbollah and the military positions are supposed to be north of the Litani River, which is about 18 miles into Lebanon. That is Israel had to go back into Lebanon in 2006 and conducted a 32-day war. Why? Because Israelis were being kidnapped by Hezbollah. Unilaterally. It's not like Israelis were going and kidnapping Hezbollah fighters and bringing them over. And so they fought a 32-day war to a standoff. Hezbollah, there's been a cold peace ever since, with occasionally, or more than occasionally, Hezbollah rocket fire, while Hezbollah has built up this gigantic arsenal. And what is frightening to Israel is that this arsenal is sophisticated, not like the Gaza arsenal. They have precision guided munitions.
Yeah, just to put the numbers, about 120,000 rockets, mortars, and missiles, but about 25,000 of them are precision guided, which means
they could hit Tel Aviv. They could hit the Azraeli Tower in
easily.
Tel Aviv, flown right. I
mean, just give you just to put this in perspective. In one day in mid-April, Iran fired off 300 projectiles against Israel. Okay, and think about what went into not only the financial costs of defending against that hit, but just think about the number of countries that were involved: CENTCOM, the Saudis, the Jordanians, the British, the French, the U.S. It was a huge and quite impressive multilateral defense effort and multinational to protect Israel from one day of 300 projectiles landing in Israel. Hezbollah could do that day after day after day after day. They have capabilities that go far beyond what Hamas has ever had. They can completely overwhelm Iron Dome, right? I mean, just think if they decide to fire 1,000 rockets in one day, and some of them are precision guided. With that, if there's all out war with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah decides to back up the truck and start emptying these arsenals on Israel, Tel Aviv will have to go underground. Tel Avivians will have to literally go underground. This will be a war like Israel has not experienced. For what? That's the question. For what? Why is Hezbollah willing to do this? And John, I just think that we've been so focused on the South. We've been so focused on Gaza and Hamas, understandably. But what you just described about the tens of thousands of people who have not been in their homes, I mean, I've spent time in some of these towns, not since October 7th, but, Kiryat Shmona, the areas around Kfar Blum. I mean, these are vibrant cities and towns. Kiryat Shmona, 25,000 people. It's a ghost town. I mean, Monty Friedman talked about that on my podcast today, but there are others I've spoken to who are from there, other than essential workers. They're there, and some agricultural workers. You are talking about cities and towns that are typically this time of year bustling tourist towns, and they are ghost towns. It is creepy. You go to whole areas of the north, and it's like they look like movie sets that aren't being used.
My sister's in-laws run a B&B up in the north near the Lebanese border. So not only, by the way, were they evacuated, though they've gone back and come back, living right near my niece and her husband and their kids. Their business is gone. Like their business is they run a B&B. There's no B&B. The entire economy of the north of Israel has been frozen in place. And so it's not just that they're bustling and vibrant. Like, this is a matter of massive economic hardship. Weirdly, the United States, we have the experience of going to war and having it have a perverse effect on our GDP, because the government starts spending like crazy and producing munitions and all of that. And World War II saved America from the Depression and all of that. And Israel is fighting a war using current stocks of weaponry that it already has, depleting them, then having to get more from the United States and others. There is no economic benefit. There is only cost. So the country is being depleted. Its spirit is being depleted. It's half, it's not half, but I mean, there's miles and miles and miles of it are evacuated. And as you say, we don't really know what Hezbollah's goal is. That's why you wonder whether I mean, Hezbollah does what Iran tells it to. That's why I say it's an offshoot of the Iranian army. Iran is up to something. It's not that Hezbollah has a territorial goal relating to the north of Israel. Hezbollah is up to something because Iran is up to something. And that is what Harris, to get back to American politics, and Trump are facing. Because does Trump really think in the first day that he's president that he can end the war with Iran? Iran views him as an enemy. Iran has an assassination squad out after looking to kill him. So I don't know. Like, that's the weirdness here, is that this regional war may start without any clear reason why Iran is going all out at Israel, if in fact that is what is going to start happening.
I don't want to leave the point about how demoralizing it is for Israelis, because I just think this issue does not get enough attention. When we say Kiryat Shmona, to use that town as an example, about 25,000 residents. Those 25,000 residents right now are spread out at 300 hotels and hostels in other parts of Israel. Now, these are families living in hotel rooms, leaving, as you said, their businesses and their lives and their schools and everything. They're living in hotel rooms, spread out. They're not with in many cases, with members of their community. They're spread out at hundreds of hotels. It's been one school year. Now it's about to be a second school year. I mean, just think about our own experience with COVID. And I mean, when kids were, so it's just, and some of these people, as Mati Friedman said in my conversation with him on my podcast, some of these people will never go back, even if it's determined to be safe at some point. They'll start lives somewhere else. And what that has done is it is shrinking the borders of Israel. This has never been done in any war or any security situation Israel has been in before, where you already take a tiny country. It's one thing for Israel to unilaterally decide to leave areas like it did in Gaza or in parts of the northern West Bank in 2005. But here, by the threats and the pressure from a terror group, an arm of Iran on its northern border, basically Israel is abandoning towns and its borders. It's like the walls are closing in on Israel. And so I think two things are true. One, Israel can't sustain this, and it is going to have to respond in a major way. I do not think that major way is going to be now, but it is going to have, at some point, it's just a matter of time. It's like it's a race against time. It's going to have to respond in a major way. That major way is going to have to include responding to Iran directly, and I'm increasingly of the view that there's no way Israel can do this without the U.S. It's one thing for American politicians to say, we have Israel's back. We'll resupply Israel with the capabilities it needs. I'm not sure that's going to be enough for whoever the next president of the United States is. I think the reality is Israel can't really deal with Iran unless this is viewed as the U.S.'s problem too, and the U.S. is all in with Israel in dealing with Iran. And that is a whole new world for the United States from a foreign policy standpoint, and for our next president, as I said, whoever it is.
And the next president, whoever it is either one is uniquely ill-suited to the challenge that you are posing them. That is to say, Trump wants to wave a magic wand and end wars, and Harris and her wing want to blame Israel for the conflict. Implicitly, they want to blame Israel. They say they have Israel's back. Biden will say, look, we did all this great stuff, harming and making ineffective the Iranian direct attack on Israel. But first of all, just to make clear, Israel doesn't want a regional war with Iran. Israel, as we just said, like Tel Aviv could be destroyed. Like my sister lives in Tel Aviv. This is no joke. And we've got shipping in the Red Sea and in the Gulf. We've got Syria and Iraq possibly under threat or partial or joining in with the jackals. This is a terrible geopolitical moment, and we have a Republican candidate who is supportive of Israel but unserious about war, and we have a Democratic candidate who, as far as we know, would tend to have sympathies that would look to go anywhere other than where you're saying she would have to go, which is in some direct role. I don't mean American troops on the ground. I mean air support. We mean there's all kinds of different things. Shipping, aircraft carriers, whatever. Matt, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, Dan, do you think Israel could wait 6 months for a new president? I mean, that seems like it's a long time, right?
It's a long time. Look, I think Israel will respond in a meaningful way, but the question is Israel going to decide this is the moment that it has to basically go to war, not only against Hezbollah, but against Iran? And I don't think they have the capacity to do that right now. I mean, they have so many of the South. They've made extraordinary progress in Gaza, extraordinary, much more than is reported. But it still occupies. I mean, I think you guys have discussed. I've discussed. The IDF was never structured, was never built for the kind of war it's fighting in Gaza. 10 months in. I mean, Israeli wars were mostly supposed to, according to Ben-Gurion's doctrine, the Israeli wars were always supposed to be away games, not home games, and they were always supposed to be fast. And Gaza has been basically a home. It's right on its border, and it's obviously in a response to a rampage that happened within its borders. And it's long. It's taken a long time. And when you have an army that's so dependent on reservists, the wear and tear on the country, on the population, on the economy is unimaginable for this stretch of time. And then on top of that, you throw on a second front, full on war. I just don't think Israel can do that right now. So I think Israel is going to. I think there's a sense that they have to deal with the North and beyond. But they need some time to reorganize and resupply. And we talked to many Israelis. They also think they need a new government to do it. That this government can't lead the country to a war in the North. We can, that's debatable. But be that as it may, it needs to reorient its troops. Its troops are not set up right now. I mean, there are many more troops stationed up north training for war against Hezbollah than is reported. That has been happening, but nothing on the scale that Israel would need. And then the civil defense. Israel's not ready for the potential barrage that could be unleashed on parts of the country that have basically been untouched from Hamas. Just the civil defense infrastructure is not set up for what could be coming. So I think Israel's going to need a lot of time one way or the other.
Right. And you also have the U.S. policy. And it seems to me that the policy under Biden is America will help Israel defend itself from attack. But that's going to be the case so long as Israel doesn't respond in a way that we dislike, right? And
it's unbelievable. By the way, that formulation makes me crazy because that's how they talk about the war in Gaza. The war in Gaza is a defensive war. Like right. Israel's responding to an attack in an effort to make sure an attack like that never happens again.
The upshot, though, is that there is no such thing as a 100% impregnable defense. And so what the Biden policy inevitably leads to is the Houthi drone flying into Tel Aviv the other week, or the Hezbollah rocket killing school children playing soccer in a field in the north. That's going to continue so long as the policy continues from the United States. And I will say, I mean, I get what you're saying about Trump, John, but let's be clear here. We've talked on this podcast about how pro-Zionist the RNC was. Unlike Harris, Trump spoke vocally denouncing the attack over the weekend. And we do know that a Trump administration would restore maximum pressure on Iran at a minimum.
Right.
And would likely be staffed likely be staffed in senior positions by, people like Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien and Tom Cotton, and we can start going through the list.
So I do think there will be some difference between a Harris and Trump presidency on this question.
I agree.
Absolutely fair enough. I mean, I do think that what we're facing here is a situation in which Israel is the aggressed against. This is now twice throughout the war with Gaza, Israel has been aggressed against by Hezbollah. And the war in Gaza started as a result of an unparalleled act of aggression, and an incredibly effective propaganda campaign has convinced Democratic voters, left of center people, that Israel is somehow to be viewed either as the aggressor or as an equally responsible for the mess that is now going on. And you see that in headlines about Hezbollah that say, fears of escalation after soccer field hit in northern Israel. Fears of escalation? Go ahead.
This is going to pose a serious problem in the coming months for Kamala Harris's campaign. She's always been, we've seen in the last 48 hours, 3 days, a lot of the Students for Justice in Palestine organizations on campuses here in the U.S. starting to issue their edicts about, at NYU, violent tactics are fine in pursuit of our goals. And in other schools where they're announcing their plans to, once again, have their protest on campus.
We have three schools. Three schools.
So yes.
We have Columbia, the University of Wisconsin, and NYU, in which Students for Justice in Palestine are now explicitly threatening and condoning violence and saying that they will target Jewish organizations on campus and Jewish students. That is in the SJB statement toward at the University of Wisconsin.
Yeah. Which, by the way, they specifically cite Hillel.
Yeah,
and they cite, I think, Chabad, maybe.
Yes.
And
two other data points just to add to what's going to happen on campus in the fall. The genocide Josh, Josh Shapiro, who's being considered for vice presidential nomination. There's a whole campaign from the left, anti-Semitic campaign, not to put him on the ticket. And then you also have this sort of general sense that she is not going to be able to speak to her left wing. And the constant concerns raised by Democrats, she's going to lose Michigan. She's going to lose Michigan if she picks someone who's Jewish for her ticket. That kind of sense is quite strong, even among moderate Democrats right now, because they're so intent on having Kamala win. She hasn't really effectively responded to that part of her movement.
And it's part of the testing. So it's not just how is she going to respond. We have a major international incident that is the potential precursor to a world historical conflict that the world could have to deal with the consequences of for decades going on, and she is silent. And we have radical groups on campus now explicitly threatening violence against Jews. Now, I don't know why.
Groups that our intelligence communities say are being encouraged and in some ways directly funded by Iran.
Yes, we know that.
Which raises the question.
Hold on, but the reason I just put a neon sign over Hillel and Chabad, these are not political organizations. Not that it would be okay if they were, but it is important to say they are communal organizations. They host Shabbat dinners. They create prayer spaces and community for Jewish holidays. This really is, to Abe's point in the piece he wrote for Commentary many months ago, this really is driving Jews underground. It's not enough that you can't be proudly pro-Israel on campus. You can't be Jewish on campus. That's what this is. That's what the goal of this is.
And I don't know, by the way, why. I understand people have the right to free speech, but by the way, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and threatening violence against Jews specifically in online statements on Instagram and TikTok. Where's the justice? I mean, I don't know. We don't know. So maybe the Justice Department is already on this. This is no joke. This is getting serious, and there's going to be a Democratic convention. And if this is the kind of talk that people are going through while we're in the sugar high, and there is this group of radicals on the left who are more affiliated with them than they are with the Trump and the right, if they're talking about this now, we're back in there's been this sort of moment of thinking, everyone's unified and wanting Kamala Harris to be the nominee and to beat Trump. I don't know if these people care whether Kamala Harris wins or beats Trump. They are after bigger fish. It's like they didn't care that Humphrey was running against Nixon and that Nixon would be bad for them. They have bigger fish to fry. And this is a very frightening moment. And I've been reading her autobiography, which has such a generic name that I can't even remember it, even though I spent 2 hours reading it last night. The Truths We Hold. So I've been reading her 2019 campaign autobiography. Granted, it's ghostwritten, where we get the freedom, her in the carriage saying freedom story and all that stuff. If she is the same person as the person I'm reading here, she is not prepared for what is coming. And I also then looked at Franklin Foer's biography of Biden.
John, what do you mean? She studied the maps. She studied the maps before Israel went into Rafah, and that's why Harris concluded they should not go into Rafah. That would be a terrible disaster. She studied the maps. I'm sure she's looking at a big map right now of the Middle East, John, and she's figuring it all out. And I bet
is it a big map or is it a Google map?
I don't know. It's just a guess. What she's going to conclude is that Israel should not defend itself. That's just my guess here, based on her study of the map.
By the way, there's another frightening aspect of this, which is, so is Biden still running things? Where's he in this? He is actually the president.
He's about to give a speech about the Supreme Court. He's about to give a big speech about how we should pack the court, we should reform the court, we should kill the court, we should have constitutional amendments that say the court is bad if it's conservative. I mean, I don't know what he's doing. I don't know who he's trying to satisfy. But I want to talk just briefly before we go about Franklin Foer's biography of Biden, the last politician, because he has a portrait in it of Kamala, whom he's trying to be kind to, I would say, not hostile to. And we've heard that she's very hard on staff. But his portrait of her is she doesn't know anything about an issue. So she'll want to read a lot of briefing books. They give her briefing books and she really wants to get up to speed, and she'll look at the briefing books, although other reports say she won't look at them, that they give them to her and she's like Trump and she won't look at them. And then she'll bring in her staff, and then she'll demand that they have a debate in front of her on some key issue. And it's like moot court or something, and she's the judge and she sits there. And Foer very delicately says, these events are sometimes can be very exhilarating because issues are being debated that are very important, but it's exhausting because they go nowhere and they last for hours and hours and come to no conclusion. This is from a favorable portrait of her.
Well, and
the Axios report that before a dinner party at the Bradley's house, the home of David Bradley, the former owner of the Atlantic, the vice president's staff had to go through a mock dinner party, peppering her with questions that might come up in this Washington salon. The idea that this is something she feels necessary, it's very frightening if you consider that she could be the most powerful person in the world in 6 months.
Well, and remember Bill Clinton, it kind of makes you long for the days where he'd stay up late at night having wonky policy discussions with his staff. And actually, presidents who know a little bit or care a little bit about policy do that naturally. That's kind of how their brains work. And the idea that she's in this role as like, the queen in Alice in Wonderland, watching people debate and then deciding which tactic she'll take. I mean, that is disturbing.
But the Clinton analogy is interesting because that was Clinton 93. That was Clinton 93 and 94. And that stuff led to a political catastrophe for Clinton and the Democrats in 94. Like, be under note, running the White House like it was some kind of a graduate seminar and then coming up with that cockamamie Rube Goldberg healthcare machine that Hillary came up with, handed Republicans control of Congress. This is not a way to run a White House. Yes, wonky people will have wonky discussions. She is not a wonk. I'm reading her book. This is not a wonk. Wonks talk about policy in a sort of. Paul Ryan was a wonk. She is not a wonk.
You either, my experience with these various politicians is you either get a wonk or if you don't have a wonk, you at least have a political leader who has a set of ideas. You know where they stand. You know what they believe in, and then they let the wonks kind of work it out or debate it out or whatever. But there's some kind of like compass. There's some kind of like directionally is where I want to go. I honestly have no idea what this woman believes. I have no. I could handle her not being a wonk if I knew that she has some like worldview. I have no idea what she believes, and all this excitement about her candidacy is about one thing. It is about desperation to stop Trump. It is not because they believe she's a vessel for any set of ideas or any vision for the future of the country.
I think if you assume that you don't know what she believes and who she is and how she got elected and where she is, that you know perfectly well what she believes. She has the beliefs of the New York Times editorial page or the Washington Post editorial, or she has conventional left liberal opinions about everything that are uncontroversial in the world in which from which she rose and in which she was marinated. She was a California Democrat who was not too far to the left because she had been a prosecutor and she was mean to parents and stuff like that. So, but I think if you read her own testimony, she has nothing interesting to say about anything, but you can assume 10,000 things about her opinions simply by dint of the fact of who she is, what enemies she hasn't made, how people talk about her in the precincts of power, that she is sort of like a completely conventional 2024 post George Floyd, post Iraq, post Obama, post healthcare, post Dobbs politician, and that she will staff her administration accordingly with people who are wonkier and will do that stuff. I now can we just conclude on
can I just say, John, I will say,
okay,
again, I don't want to defend Biden here, but in those early months after October 7th, Biden's administration was staffed with those kinds of people too. And they wanted to move Biden in a direction that was different than he ultimately moved in on Israel, at least in those first few months before he got wobbly. And he was the check on his own administration.
Yeah.
He was the one telling his staff, no, we're doing this, not that. So she will be staffed by those same people, except this is the part where, like, is she going to be the check on anything? Or is she just going to be a vessel for them? I mean, Biden did kind of hold the line to some degree on certain issues. I have no confidence that she will.
Right.
She's unburdened by the past, Dan, so she will.
I think, can we just take a few minutes to talk about J.D. Vance? Because you brought up J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance, the vice president, doesn't matter, and all of that. I do think that there is a larger institutional issue within Trump world about the Vance pick that I think is very interesting. And that is, from what we can gather, Trump overrode his own instincts or allowed his instincts to be pushed in the Vance direction by the MAGA people who are closest to him, meaning his son Eric, Tucker, a couple of other people. Susie Wiles, his co-campaign manager, did not wanted Youngkin, we're told, or maybe Rubio.
Yeah.
He went the other way. Vance is getting terrible reviews. He is the first vice presidential candidate to come out of a convention with a negative approval rating. His approval rating was 6 points underwater. Dan Quayle was 20 points positive after the Republican. We look at Dan Quayle and we think, oh my God, he was such a disaster and all of that. People ended up having a positive opinion of Dan Quayle after the Republican convention, not Vance. And Trump cares about this stuff way more than anybody else ever has. And Vance getting bad reviews and looking bad and not handling this matter in a way that helps, It's not like George H.W. Bush, who came out and said, I've never seen anybody give a young senator this kind of pounding, the pounding you're giving Dan Quayle. Like, I am standing behind him resolutely, which is what Bush did in 88. You're not hearing Trump talk about Vance very much at these rallies and stuff like that. And I just wonder if he's going to look at that team of people and say, even if one of them is his son, and say, I'm not listening to you anymore. You gave me some crapola advice, and that could be really, really important, because we are now talking about the heart and soul of a potential second Trump administration. Dan, you said maybe he'll have Pompeo and O'Brien. We'll have a restoration of Pompeo and O'Brien. Tom Cotton could go to defense, and then we will have this kind of like American, power, American greatness, genuine American great,
version of the first Trump administration,
right? With people who believe in interventionism and believe in the projection of American power, or it could go in the other direction. One of the reasons we were worried about Vance is that he seemed to be a voice of the sort of, I don't care about Ukraine, right? Which is what Vance said. Frankly, I don't care about Ukraine. So if Vance is in bad odor, oddly enough, I think that could have larger consequences for a Trump future than anybody is really, because he cares about the reviews. He's supposed to not care about, because the liberal media are so terrible and they always do this to every Republican and blah, blah, blah. And that's not the case. Like, he picked somebody, didn't do any due diligence.
You know what's important to note, though? We've been hearing a lot about how people in Trump world are unhappy with the Vance pick. I have yet to read any stories saying that Trump is unhappy with the Vance pick. And sometimes you do get those stories, and you get, the Maggie Habermans of the world reporting, sources close to Trump say that he's disappointed, and often those sources
to Trump named Trump.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Named John Barron.
I haven't seen any of that with this. You have seen a lot of people in Trump's orbit, Republican strategists in the larger circle, saying that Vance is off to a bad start, is not really even launching from the tarmac, taking off. But it still seems Trump likes him. And it goes back a couple of weeks before the pick was made, when I think it was Mark Caputo of the Bulwark reported that, one potential stumbling block for Vance would be his beard, because Trump has a history of not favoring men with facial hair. And Trump was then asked about this by Brian Kilmeade on Kilmeade's radio show. And Trump was like, no, that's not a problem at all. He looks like a young Abraham Lincoln. And then later he was describing Vance. I forget whether it was one of the post-convention rallies or something. He talked about Vance's beautiful blue eyes, his beautiful blue. So I think that's the only hiccup in your theory, John. It's just that until I see that reporting or something, or passive aggressive comments from Trump, I think he's still got that relationship solidly fixed.
Also, this is such a weird period. There's no comp for it, because normally the vice president comes out of the convention, and if it's like a new personality that's being introduced to the country, they have a few weeks before the Democratic convention to fix hiccups, to do interviews, to kind of reintroduce themselves. They have a lot more running room. Vance had like 5 days. I mean, literally, because then it went with Biden not running, and then it went to Harris, the consolidation. So he had
next week it will be Kamala's vice presidential pick.
Right.
So she has to announce that in the next week, basically.
So we're all fixated with how much, that the Democrats unearthing these, digging up these bad clips of Vance, and they could be a problem, I suppose, in the general election. But like right now, the idea that, I don't know, it's such a weird time that everything's getting compressed. I think the Vance rollout is a little bit of a sideshow.
Okay, so maybe I'm overestimating. I still think that Trump likes to blame people for decisions that he makes that go awry, and so that seems to have been a classic element of his presidency, when he fired somebody and then he said, I don't know why anyone picked John Kelly to be the chief of staff, or something like that. It's a real issue. So right. Well, Dan Senor, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to skip the commentary recommends. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Matt, and Christine. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.